The lock had been cut clean, down to the hasp. She stood in front of Unit 47 on a Tuesday morning in early March. The kind of morning that couldn't decide whether to snow or just threaten it. And she stared at the empty steel ring where her padlock used to hang. The orange cut mark on the hasp was bright as a wound. Behind her, the Clearwater self-storage office hummed faintly under fluorescent light, and the manager, a man named Dale with coffee-stained teeth, stood with his arms folded and offered nothing useful. "Might have been vandals," he said. "Happens sometimes." Eunice Mallard did not say what she thought of that. She was 73 years old, and she had spent most of those years not saying what she thought of things, and she had learned that this was usually the wiser course. She stood with both hands wrapped around her coat buttons, and she looked at the cut lock, and she did not open the door. Because she could not open the door. That was the whole problem. And had been the whole problem for 11 months. If this story moves you, stay with it to the end. And if stories like this one find you at the right moment, consider subscribing and turning on the bell. There are more to come. The unit had been her husband Gerald's. He had rented it 22 years ago, back when they were still running the feed and seed on Carpenter Street, and needed overflow space for bulk seed bags and irrigation parts. Gerald had been the kind of man who held on to things, not out of sentimentality exactly, but out of a conviction that anything useful today might be more useful later. The unit had outlasted the store by 11 years and outlasted Gerald himself by 14 months. He died on a Thursday in January. Heart. The way it usually was with men his age, which was 79. Eunice had been in the kitchen making oatmeal when she heard the sound he made, which was not dramatic. It was just a small sound, like something setting down. She had paid the storage unit invoice every month since. $112, withdrawn automatically from the checking account Gerald had set up, which Eunice had barely touched, because she did not entirely understand it, and she did not entirely trust it, and she had been meaning to sit down with someone at the bank and work through it, but she had not yet done that. The invoices came, she confirmed the charges, and she paid them. The problem was the key. Gerald had kept the unit key on a ring with 3 others, and Eunice had looked for that key ring for 4 months after he died. She had looked in his shop, in his truck, in the 3 drawers of the kitchen that were his by long custom, in the old coffee can on the top shelf of the mudroom where he kept spare change and small hardware, and the things he didn't want to lose. She had looked in the lining of his winter coat, and behind the passenger seat of the Silverado, and in the wooden tackle box he hadn't opened since his knees gave out in 2019. She had not found it. A locksmith had told her $40 to cut the lock and replace it. She had put that in her mind as the plan, and then she had not done it either, because driving to Clearwater's self-storage and standing in front of Unit 47 without Gerald felt like a larger task than it sounded, and each month that passed made it larger still. So she paid the invoice, and she told herself she would get to it, and she did not get to it. 11 months, $1,232. And now someone had cut the lock for her. And she stood in the cold looking at the open hasp, and she could not make herself reach for the door handle. She drove home instead. The unit stayed closed. Marcus Webb had been sleeping in his truck for 4 nights running, which was not the worst 4 nights he'd had in his life, but which were cold enough that Kip had taken to pressing his back against Marcus's legs through the sleeping bag, which Marcus appreciated even if he wouldn't have admitted it in those words. Kip was a German shepherd, 6 years old, 91 pounds of working line muscle, and opinion. He had a sable coat that ran from dark charcoal at the saddle to a warm amber rust at the chest and legs, with a black muzzle and black-tipped ears that stood fully upright and rarely moved except when he had decided something required his attention. He had a torn notch in the base of his right ear from a training drill gone sideways in 2021, and he wore a plain dark green nylon collar with a stainless tag that said KIP on one side and a phone number on the other that no one had called in 2 years. Marcus had found Clearwater by accident, the way he found most places, which was that the highway had ended at an intersection and he had needed to make a choice, and this road looked as good as the other one. He was 41 years old, 3 inches over 6 feet, with the kind of build that came from 20 years of doing what the Marine Corps asked and then not stopping once it stopped asking. His hair was dark brown, cropped close, going gray at the left temple only, which he found slightly absurd. His face was angular and tan past what winter usually left on a person, with 2 parallel creases at the outer corners of each eye from years of squinting at distances. His hands were large and scarred at the knuckles from reasons he no longer thought about in order. He had been a gunnery sergeant. He had been other things, too, most of which did not appear on any document. He had separated from service 14 months ago, which meant he had been moving since then, which meant almost everywhere he stopped felt the same as the place before it. Clearwater was a town of about 9,000 people in a river valley in the upper Midwest, surrounded by farmland that looked lonely in winter and probably looked the same way in summer if you were in the right mood to see it. It had a main street with a diner on one end and a dollar store on the other and a hardware store in the middle that appeared to be winning. Marcus parked in the lot behind the diner on a Wednesday morning because Kip needed water and Marcus needed coffee, and neither of those things required much planning. He was on his second cup when the woman came in. She was not tall. She was the kind of woman who had probably been described as slight all her life, though she moved through the diner with the specific deliberateness of someone who had stopped being hurried by anyone's schedule besides her own. White hair, cut short and neat, a brown canvas coat that had seen several winters. Her face was lined and specific, with pale gray eyes that moved over the room quickly and then settled somewhere in the middle distance, and she sat at the counter 2 stools down from Marcus and ordered tea and toast without looking at the menu. Kip, who had been lying under the counter stool with his chin on Marcus's boot, raised his head and looked at her. Then he set his chin back down. Marcus noticed that. The woman, whose name he did not yet know, stirred her tea without drinking it for a long time. The diner owner, a woman named Patty Gross, who had forearms like a mason and a voice built for larger rooms, refilled Marcus's cup without being asked and said to the white-haired woman, "You look like you're working something out, Eunice." "I suppose I am," Eunice Mallard said. She told it quietly, the way people tell things they've been holding for too long to anyone who will hold still long enough to hear. She told it to Patty, but Patty was moving, and Marcus was not, and so it landed mostly with Marcus. The storage unit, the key, the 11 months of invoices, the cut lock she'd found that morning, the door she could not make herself open. She had described the problem in the most practical terms she had, and yet the practical terms kept breaking open into something larger. A man's things, sealed in a room, and the widow who could not go look at them. Marcus had heard people describe loss in many ways, across many years and many places. The ones that got him were never the dramatic ones. They were the ones like this, where the wound was just the size of a key ring, and the key ring had been missing for 11 months, and the invoice kept coming every month as though nothing had changed. "I don't know who would cut it," she said. "I don't know if something's been taken. I can't even bring myself to look." Marcus wrapped both hands around his mug and said nothing. Kip had raised his head again. "Gerald kept everything in there," Eunice said. Everything from the store. Everything from before. I don't know what I'm afraid to find. Marcus said, sometimes it's easier with someone there. She looked at him for the first time directly. She looked at Kip. He's well behaved, Marcus said, which was not entirely accurate, but close enough. Eunice considered this for a moment, the way she had considered everything in her life, which was carefully and without hurrying. Tomorrow morning, she said. Marcus said, I'll be here. He was. They drove separately, Marcus following Eunice's white sedan through the grid of streets to the storage facility on the east side of town, where the road ran flat toward the fields and the sky opened up gray and wide. Dale, the manager, watched them from the office window with his arms still folded. Marcus nodded at him once. Kip looked at him for a long moment and then looked away, which Marcus took as a meaningful verdict. Unit 47 was at the far end of the row, farthest from the office, which Marcus noted. He noted a few other things, too. The security camera above the office door pointed at the entrance gate and not at the units. The chain-link fence along the east side had a section that had been pushed out at the bottom and then pushed back, not quite flush. The gravel at the far end of the row was disturbed in a pattern that was not consistent with foot traffic. He did not say any of this yet. He stood beside Eunice at Unit 47 and looked at the cut hasp. The cut was clean, made with bolt cutters rather than a saw, which meant someone who had come prepared. The orange metal at the cut was already beginning to dull, a day old, maybe two. He looked at the door, at the small gap where it met the frame, and crouched to look at the bottom track. Can I open it? He said. Eunice pulled her coat tighter and nodded. Marcus gripped the handle and rolled the door up in one motion. The metal rattled and clattered up into its housing, and the interior smell came out first, which was the smell of old cardboard and machine oil and a slight sweetness that Marcus identified after a second as dried grass seed, deep in a sealed bag somewhere in the back. The unit was full. Not chaotically full, but methodically full, the way a careful man fills a space. Shelving units along both walls made of 2x4s and plywood, each level loaded with labeled boxes. Canned goods. Seed bags stacked 3 high on a wooden pallet in the back corner, sealed in heavy plastic wrap. Tools racked on pegboard along the right wall. Levels, pipe wrenches, fencing pliers, a manual soil auger. Things that belong to a working life. 2 wooden chairs, disassembled and wrapped in moving blankets. A steel filing cabinet. 2 drawers, padlocked. Eunice stood in the doorway and did not go in. Marcus watched her face. She was not crying. She was doing the thing that people do when they are standing at the edge of something that goes deeper than they expected, which is that she went very still. Kip stepped forward and pressed his shoulder against her leg, lightly, and stayed there. She put her hand on his head without thinking about it. Gerald was organized, Marcus said after a moment. He was, she said. He was very organized. She went in slowly. Marcus stayed near the entrance to give her room. She walked along the left shelving unit, reading the labels on the boxes, touching a few of them. She stopped at a box labeled Store Records, Seed Inventory 2009 to 2011, and put her palm flat on the top of it for a moment, not opening it. Then she moved on. She stopped at a second box, this one labeled Correspondence Seed Suppliers. Her hand rested there too, briefly, and then moved on. She was walking through Gerald's thinking, Marcus understood. The categories he'd used, the years he'd organized by. The logic of what he'd kept and where. She stopped in front of the filing cabinet. I need to know what's in here, she said. Marcus borrowed bolt cutters from his truck and cut the cabinet's padlock, and they worked through the 2 drawers together, Eunice sitting on a camp stool she'd found, folded against the back wall, and Marcus crouching beside her. The files were labeled in Gerald's handwriting, which was precise and slightly slanted. Tax records going back to 1998, the deed to the house, a copy, insurance documents, vehicle titles, and in a hanging folder at the very back of the second drawer, labeled in a different hand, one that was bolder and less careful than Gerald's, a folder that said storage and contained 3 documents. The first was the lease agreement for Unit 47, going back to 2003, renewed each year, currently costing $112 per month. The second was a letter on the letterhead of something called Clearwater Valley Storage Holdings, LLC, dated 8 months ago, 4 months after Gerald's death, informing the estate of Gerald H. Mallard that as of the following month, the monthly rate for Unit 47 would increase to $175, with a second increase to $240 scheduled for 6 months later. Eunice read this letter twice. The third document was a second letter, dated 3 months after the first, from the same LLC, notifying her that per the terms of the lease, failure to pay the updated rate constituted default, and that the contents of Unit 47 were subject to lien and sale at public auction to satisfy the outstanding balance, currently listed at $417. Eunice sat with the letter in her lap for a long time. Outside, the wind moved across the gravel row with a sound like someone dragging something heavy. "I've been paying $112, she said. "I know," Marcus said. "They never told me the rate had changed. They never sent anything to the house." "They sent it here," Marcus said. "To the unit address." She looked at him. "The invoices you've been getting," he said carefully. "Do they still show $112? She thought about it. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the lien letter. "So they've been collecting the old rate and accruing a fictional balance at the new rate at the same time, which they then plan to use to justify a lien sale." Kip had moved to the entrance of the unit and stood looking out at the row, ears forward, attention fixed on something beyond Marcus's current angle of view. Marcus stood up. "The cut lock," Eunice said. "Someone came in here. Before you could see any of this." He moved to the entrance beside Kip and looked down the row. The office window showed Dale's silhouette, still and watching. "Is anything missing?" he said. Eunice looked around the unit again, slowly, methodically, the same way she had been looking at things her whole life. She went to the back shelving. She checked the boxes on the right wall. She opened the top of one seed bag. "The filing cabinet contents," she said finally. "As far as I can tell, they're complete. Gerald made copies of everything." She paused. "There's a gap on the right shelf, second from the bottom. Something rectangular was here. The dust outline is clear." Marcus looked at it. The rectangle was roughly 8 inches by 12, an inch deep. A flat box, a photo album maybe, or a ledger. "Gerald's copies," he said. She understood immediately. He would have kept copies of the lease, of the original rate. Marcus said someone came to get those before you could. The quiet between them held the weight of that for a full minute. Eunice stood up straight, which she did with some effort, and pressed her lips together, and then she said something that Marcus would not forget. "That man thinks I'm old enough to confuse," she said. "And he's right that I'm old. He's wrong about the rest." Marcus drove back to the diner because it was the place he knew, and he sat in the corner booth with his laptop open and Kip under the table, and he started looking. He was methodical about it, which was one of the things he was. He looked up Clearwater Valley Storage Holdings, LLC, through the state's business registry. He found it. The registered agent was a man named Philip Cobb, with a Clearwater address that turned out to be a UPS store. The LLC had been registered 14 months ago, which was 2 months after Gerald Mallard's death, which was not a coincidence, Marcus was willing to call one. He looked up the previous owner of Clearwater Self-Storage, a family named Bertrand who had run it for 31 years. He found a small item in the local paper's online archive 8 months back about the Bertrands selling the facility to an investment group to fund their retirement. The article quoted a Philip Cobb as the acquiring party's representative. He looked up Cobb. Cobb, 53 years old, was a property management consultant based 40 miles south with a track record in 3 other counties that the state attorney general's office had apparently been interested in the previous year. There was a civil complaint in the court records, filed by 2 elderly property owners, alleging predatory lease restructuring and fraudulent lien enforcement. The complaint had been settled, terms undisclosed. That phrase, terms undisclosed, was one Marcus had always found instructive. It meant someone had been paid to be quiet, which meant someone had known they were exposed, which meant the behavior had a pattern and a cost already calculated. Cobb had done this before, and known what it was worth to make it stop. What it was worth was almost certainly less than what he planned to extract from Clearwater. Marcus sat back and looked at the window. Outside, Clearwater's main street went about its afternoon with no idea what was happening in a storage facility on the east edge of town. Patty came over with coffee and set it down without being asked. She looked at his screen without being invited. "You're looking up Cobb," she said. "You know him," Marcus said. "Everybody knows him," Patty said. "Or knows of him. He bought the storage place 8 months ago, and 6 people I know have gotten letters they don't understand. Harriet Dean got one. Ray Vickers. Dale's been telling everyone it's just a business adjustment." She set the coffee pot on the table and folded her arms. "What's he doing with Eunice?" Marcus told her. Patty's expression went through 2 or 3 things in quick succession and arrived at something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but lived right between them. "She's been paying that bill every month," Patty said. "After Gerald?" "Yes," Marcus said. Patty picked up the coffee pot and went back behind the counter, and Marcus heard her make a call, but he did not hear to whom. He drove that afternoon to a building on the south end of Main Street, where the county clerk's office occupied the ground floor of a building that also housed a dentist and an insurance agent, and a notary public who kept the same hours as everyone else, which was irregular. The county clerk was a woman named Beverly Tran, mid-40s, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the specific demeanor of someone who has seen enough paperwork to take nothing in it personally. Marcus explained what he had. Beverly Tran took her glasses off and set them down, which was how Marcus understood that she was about to pay real attention to something. "A lien filing on a unit whose occupant is current on the invoice rate she's receiving," she said. "Current on the rate they've been charging her," Marcus said. "The increase was never communicated to her by any method she could have received. They sent notice to the unit." Beverly was quiet for a moment, thinking. She set the second letter down on the desk and aligned it with the edge of a folder, the way someone does when they need their hands occupied while their mind works. The state's storage lien statute requires written notice by certified mail to the occupant's last known address, not to the unit. The unit isn't a person. "No," Marcus said, "it is not." "If the certified mail step wasn't completed," Beverly said, "the lien filing is defective. The sale can't proceed. The whole action is void." She looked at the letters again. And they would have known that. Anyone doing this regularly would know that. Which means they expected her not to check, Marcus said. Or not to know what she was looking at if she did. Beverly pressed her lips together. "I've been seeing some odd property filings in the past year. This facility isn't the only one. I'd like to know if they actually filed certified mail," Marcus said. Beverly turned to her computer. She typed for a while. Marcus waited. Kip sat beside him and watched Beverly work with what looked like genuine interest, his ears forward, head tilted slightly, as though the database searches were personally meaningful to him. "There's a lien filing on that unit," Beverly said. "Filed 6 weeks ago." She typed more. She cross-referenced something with a second screen. She was thorough, Marcus noted. No corresponding certified mail receipt in the county records, which they'd need to support the filing. She turned to look at Marcus over her glasses. "This is a problem for Mr. Cobb." Marcus asked if she knew anyone at the state attorney general's office. Beverly smiled, which transformed her face briefly into something much warmer than its professional default. "I might," she said. "I might also know a reporter." He went back to Eunice's house that evening, a small blue house on a street of small houses, each one maintaining its dignity against the winter with varying degrees of success. Eunice's was one of the better ones. The porch was clean. The walk had been shoveled, probably by a neighbor because the task looked like it had been done by someone younger and more vigorous than Eunice. There was a clay pot by the door with a dead plant in it that someone had put there in good faith last spring and that the winter had been unkind to. She met him at the door with tea already made, which told him she had been expecting him, which told him a few things about her. He sat at her kitchen table and told her what he'd found. He told it plainly, without managing her reactions, because she was not someone who needed her reactions managed. When he was done, she sat for a moment with her cup. 14 months, she said. He set this up 2 months after Gerald died. Yes. He looked for people who'd just lost someone, she said. People who might be confused. People paying invoices on things they hadn't thought about yet. That seems to be the pattern, Marcus said. There are others in town. She set down her cup. I want to know who. Marcus told her the names Patty had given him. Eunice was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Harriet Dean has been fighting pneumonia since January. She probably doesn't even know. She stood up and went to the phone that was mounted to the wall by the refrigerator, which was an actual wall-mounted phone with a cord, which Marcus noted with something close to respect. She dialed from memory. He listened to half a conversation and understood from it that Eunice knew everyone in Clearwater who needed to know about this, and that she had been knowing them for 50 years, and that her phone was about to be busy for a while. The conversation was warm and then serious and then warm again at the end, the way conversations go between people who trust each other. He heard her say Gerald's name twice, matter-of-factly, without flinching, the way a person does when they have been practicing saying a name aloud so that it does not break them. He refilled his own tea from the pot on the counter and sat back and let her work. Kip had found a spot near the radiator and was doing the particular settled thing he did when he had decided a place was safe. Over the next 10 days, something assembled itself in Clearwater that had not been there before, or had been there all along and just needed a point of convergence. Eunice became that point. She was not the kind of woman who organized things through force of personality or volume. She organized them the way water organizes around stones, by finding the natural channels. Ray Vickers came in from his farm 12 miles out, a man of 70 with a limp from a tractor accident in 1998, and a handshake that had put more than one younger man off balance. He brought a folder of his own documents. Harriet, who was recovering from pneumonia and probably should not have been out, came anyway, driven by her daughter. She brought documents, too. 3 other families sent representatives. A retired attorney named Bert Salas, who had closed his practice 6 years ago and spent his retirement fishing and playing chess with strangers at the library. heard about the gathering from Patty and came with his reading glasses and a yellow legal pad, and the specific alertness of a man who had missed work more than he expected to. They met in the back room of the diner on a Thursday morning. Patty had pushed 3 tables together and set out mugs and had made a second pot of the strong coffee she kept for cold mornings. She did not charge for any of it, and nobody mentioned money. The room was quiet when people settled in. Ray set his folder on the table and put his reading glasses on. Harriet's daughter helped her into a chair and then pulled one alongside for herself and got out her phone to take notes, which was practical thinking. Bert Salas opened his legal pad to the first page and wrote the date. Marcus sat in the corner and mostly listened, which was his preferred role in situations that did not require him to be anything other than a person taking careful note of what was happening. Kip sat under his chair. Bert went through the documents with the group and confirmed what Beverly had identified in the county records, which was that the certified mail requirement had been skipped for every single lien filing. Every one. 6 families, 6 defective filings. He was counting on people not looking, Bert said. Or not knowing what they were looking at, if they did. Ray said something quiet and not very polite about Cobb, and then apologized to the women in the room, and Eunice told him there was nothing to apologize for. Marcus had spent the previous 3 evenings compiling a detailed packet that included copies of each lien filing, the corresponding certified mail records from the county clerk's office showing no receipts, the business registry for Clearwater Valley Storage Holdings, LLC, the prior civil complaint from the Attorney General's records, and a timeline he had built showing that the LLC had been registered within 60 days of Gerald Mallard's death, and that the first irregular lien filings had followed within weeks of the LLC acquiring the facility. He gave the packet to Bert, who read through it carefully, and then looked up. "Who put this together?" Bert asked. No one answered right away. "Because this is thorough," Bert said. Marcus said, "There's someone at the AG's office who Beverly knows." Bert nodded slowly. "There's also someone at the State Licensing Board who might be interested in a storage facility operator running what looks like a predatory lien scheme targeting estates and elderly unit holders." He looked at Marcus again, not asking a question exactly, but waiting for something. "Fax it to both," Marcus said. It went out the next morning from the county clerk's fax machine with Beverly's signature on the cover sheet, which gave it a formality that a private submission would have lacked. Bert submitted a parallel complaint through the State Bar's Elder Financial Exploitation Reporting Channel, which he had access to as a retired attorney. Beverly had also made a call to a reporter named Sandra Keene at the county's weekly paper, who was 28 years old and had been writing about property transfers and zoning disputes for 2 years, and who showed up to the diner the next morning with a notebook and a recorder and the specific hunger of a person who has been covering small stories and just smelled a real one. Marcus talked to her for 45 minutes. He was careful and specific and did not speculate. He told her what the documents showed and let the documents do the work, because the documents were more persuasive than he was. Eunice talked to her for 2 hours. The article ran the following Thursday. It was on the front page above the fold, which was the first time in 4 years that anything about property fraud had made the front page of the Clearwater County Courier. Sandra Keene had done her homework. She had pulled the documents herself, called the AG's office, and gotten a non-denial that amounted to a confirmation, and gotten Cobb's attorney on the record with a statement that was polished and defensive in equal measure. The Attorney General's office opened a formal investigation the following Monday. Cobb did not appear in Clearwater again. A notice from Clearwater Valley Storage Holdings LLC, on different letterhead now, arrived by certified mail, correctly this time, at Eunice's house 2 weeks after the article ran, informing her that all rate adjustment notices were hereby rescinded and that her account was current at the original lease rate of $112 per month. Eunice read it at her kitchen table while the morning light came through the window above the sink and landed on the surface of her tea. Gerald would have hated this, she said. The whole thing. Someone looking at his papers. Marcus, who had stayed through all of it because there had been no good reason to leave, was sitting across from her. Kip was under the table. Outside, March had shifted perceptibly toward something that was not yet spring, but was thinking about it. He would have liked the ending, Marcus said. She looked at him over her cup. You think so? A man who kept 22 years of organized files and 2 copies of every document, Marcus said. Wanted someone to be able to read them eventually. She was quiet for a moment. The key, she said. I never found the key. You didn't need it, Marcus said. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was in the same neighborhood. Marcus had been staying at a motel on the south edge of town for 3 weeks, which was longer than he stayed anywhere. The truck was in the parking lot every morning when he went out, but he had not packed it once. He had been thinking about the storage unit, the way it sat out there on the east side of town, organized and intact, everything from the working life of a careful man laid out in order and waiting. It seemed to him like a thing that deserved to be properly looked after. Not necessarily by him. Someone, though. Patty had mentioned during the Thursday gathering that her brother-in-law owned a warehouse unit on the north side and was looking for someone to manage the facility in exchange for a room in the building behind it. Marcus had not said anything to that when she said it. He was thinking about it now. He drove out to the storage facility on a Saturday afternoon, which was the first genuinely clear day in weeks, the sky a hard, bright blue that made everything on the ground look slightly more real than usual. He walked the east row to Unit 47 and stood in front of it. The hasp had been replaced with a new one. Eunice had a new key. She had given a copy to Marcus, and he wasn't entirely sure why he'd taken it. He opened the door and stood in the entrance. It smelled the same. Old cardboard, machine oil, dried grass seed from the back. Gerald's things organized and intact. The filing cabinet with its drawers restored to order. The tools racked on the pegboard. The seed bags patient and sealed on their pallet. Kip walked in past him and went to the back of the unit and sniffed along the bottom shelf and then turned and sat down and looked at Marcus with the expression he used when he had assessed something and found it acceptable. Marcus stood in the doorway with the March light at his back and looked at the room. There was a town here. There were people in it who had needed something and had found it, or found it in time. There was a woman who had kept paying for a door she couldn't open for 11 months, not because she was weak, but because grief does that to the bravest people, makes the distances between things longer than they are. There was a filing cabinet full of a man's careful records that had been waiting for someone with the patience to read them. He stood there for a while. Kip waited. Marcus thought about the warehouse unit on the north side and the room behind it. He thought about Bert, who had been visibly invigorated by having something useful to do with his legal training again. He thought about Beverly and her methodical attention, and her beaded glasses chain, and the way she had smiled when she said she might know someone at the AG's office, which was the smile of a person who had been waiting for a reason to make that call. He thought about Eunice, who had stood in the entrance of this unit and not gone in, and then had gone in and had found what was there. He closed the unit door. He snapped the new padlock into the hasp and tested it. He drove back toward town with Kip riding in the front seat, which he was not technically supposed to do. And Kip put his head out the window despite the cold and watched the fields go past with the alert patience that characterized everything he did. Marcus pulled into the lot behind the diner. He did not leave the engine running. He went inside. Patty looked up from behind the counter. He sat on the same stool he'd been sitting on since he arrived. "About that warehouse?" he said. Patty set down the coffee pot. She looked at him for a moment. "Room's nothing fancy," she said. "I'm used to nothing fancy," Marcus said. She refilled his cup. Kip, who had come in and settled under the stool with his chin on Marcus's boot, was still. Not in the way he was still when he was waiting for something to be resolved. In the way he was still when things already had been. There are people in this world who spend years moving because staying has felt like more than they could manage, and there is no shame in that. Movement is its own kind of faithfulness, sometimes. A refusal to go numb, a way of staying available to the next place that needs you. There are also moments, quieter than you expect, when the moving stops, not because you force it, because you look around and notice you are already somewhere. Because someone in a diner told the truth about a storage unit they couldn't open, and you happen to be the only person not moving at that particular moment. And the dog raised his head, and you stayed to see what happened. Gerald spent 22 years keeping careful records. He left them organized and labeled and locked, and trusted that eventually someone would come who could use them. That is a kind of faith, too. The fields outside Clearwater were gray and bare and would be green in 2 months. The river was still running under its half-frozen surface. The town was small and specific and imperfect and alive, the way real towns are, and it had people in it worth knowing. Marcus Webb was not, by nature, a man who said much about what he felt. He was a man who acted on it when he could. He stayed. May you find yourself in the right place at the right moment, even when you arrive without knowing it. May the things left behind by careful people find their way to those who need them. May the locks that kept you out turn out to have been waiting for the right hands. And may God bless you and hold you. Wherever you've laid your head tonight,